This is one of those stories where the American dream just gets twisted into an absolute nightmare. We're talking about one man who held an entire immigrant community in a death grip of fear, using fraud, intimidation, and even murder. We're going to break down the rise and incredible fall of this modern-day Godfather.
Okay, let's just start with this quote, because it really gets to the heart of everything. Think about it. He had this community petrified. This wasn't just your average crime spree. This was psychological warfare. The guy at the center of all this, Dhinsa, he built up this aura of terror, so much so that he could do whatever he wanted right in front of hundreds of people. And he just knew, that silence was going to be his greatest weapon.
So, that's the big question, right? How does one guy build a $60 million empire on fear? It's a crazy story, really. It involves a super sophisticated criminal enterprise, an investigation that almost completely fell apart, and honestly, the unbelievable bravery of the few people who dared to speak up. So let's get into it. Let's break down how this whole thing was built, and then how it all came crashing down.
All right, section 1. Every story's got a beginning, right? And this one, well, it doesn't start with a big explosion or anything like that. It starts with something quieter, a disappearance, a single person vanishing, and that one loose thread, it's going to unravel a massive criminal conspiracy that absolutely baffled police and just terrified an entire community.
So, check this out. It all kicks off back in July of '95. A gas station attendant, a guy named Singh, he just vanishes, without a trace. Now his brother, Manmohan, he's not about to let that go. He gets on a plane, comes all the way from India just to find out what happened. And for almost 2 years, he's pounding the pavement, asking questions, digging. And you know what? He gets dangerously close to the truth. And then, he's silenced too.
And this is where the police knew something was way off. I mean, sure, it looked like a robbery at first glance. The cash register was hit, but here's the thing. They left money behind. And Manmohan, he was shot at close range while he was on his knees. This was no random stick-up. No way. This was a professional hit. It was an execution, plain and simple, and it was designed to send a message.
So who was sending that message? Well, it was a man who was already pretty well known within the local Sikh community. A guy who, like so many others, came to America with basically nothing. But he built his fortune a different way. Through corruption, through violence. They had a name for him. They called him the Indian Godfather. And just look at this number, $60 million. This shows you the insane scale we're talking about here. This wasn't some small-time crook hitting gas stations. Dhinsa was running a massive $60 million enterprise. And let's be real, that kind of money, it buys you a whole lot of power, a whole lot of silence, and a whole lot of loyalty.
So how in the world did he pull this off? Well, let's break down the foundation of this whole empire. First, he owned a ton of businesses, over 50 gas stations. The engine, the thing that made all the money, was this really sophisticated fraud where they rigged the pumps to skim millions from customers who had no idea. And the protection? The walls around this empire? They were built with intimidation, threats, kidnapping, and hired guns for contract murder.
And here's the really crazy part. Dhinsa wasn't some ghost hiding in the shadows. This guy had a long criminal record. I'm talking convictions for assault, kidnapping, fraud, the whole shebang. But time and time again, he'd serve a little bit of time, get right back on the street, and pick up right where he left off. He seemed totally untouchable. And of course, that just made his fearsome reputation even bigger.
Okay, so even with all that fear, with that very real danger, a few people refused to stay silent. But in Dhinsa's world, as you can imagine, speaking the truth, well, it came with the ultimate price.
So after Manmohan was murdered, these two men, Satinderjeet Singh and another guy named Sarjit, they did something incredibly brave. They walked into a police station and they did the one thing nobody else would do. They named names. They named the Godfather. They directly connected Dhinsa to the murder of their friend and to the disappearance of his brother. And Dhinsa's response, it was swift, it was brutal, and it was very, very public. Just one day, one single day, before a key court hearing, the witness, Satinderjeet Singh, was shot and killed. A public execution. The message couldn't have been clearer. The second witness, Sarjit, did what anyone would do. He fled the state in fear with his family. And just like that, it looked like the entire case against Dhinsa was about to just crumble.
But this is where everything changed. The investigation took a huge turn. Instead of just looking at these murders one by one, federal prosecutors stepped in, and they decided to use a very powerful tool, the RICO Act. Basically, this law lets them go after the leader of a whole criminal enterprise for the crimes they order other people to commit. So the strategy shifted. They weren't just chasing the hitmen anymore. They were going after the kingpin for running the whole show.
Now, to take down the kingpin with a RICO charge, you need someone on the inside. You need the guy who actually pulled the trigger. And that's what happened. The entire case was about to hinge on one person. The confession of Dhinsa's most trusted enforcer.
So, investigators get a tip from an informant, and they get a name, Marvin Dodson. Turns out, this was Dhinsa's strong arm, his go-to guy for the dirty work. So they put his photo in a lineup, show it to the cousin of the murdered witness, who was actually in the car when the shooting happened, and boom, he immediately points to Dodson. They had their trigger man.
Okay, so Dodson is facing a life sentence, and he decides to talk. And when he talks, his confession is just devastating for Dhinsa. He lays out the whole thing, step by step. He says Dhinsa hired him. Dhinsa gave him the witness's address and license plate. Dhinsa specifically ordered the hit for the day before the hearing. And then Dhinsa paid him 20 grand for the murder. It was the perfect, direct line from the man who pulled the trigger right to the Godfather who gave the order.
But wait, there's more. Dodson wasn't done. He also confessed to that first murder, the murder of Manmohan Singh, the brother who just came from India looking for answers. And what's so chilling when you see it laid out like this is how cold and transactional it all was. Manmohan's life was worth $4,000. But Satinderjeet, who was a direct threat to Dhinsa's freedom, his life cost $20,000, 5 times as much.
So, with the hitman's confession in their pocket, investigators finally had the key. They had the leverage they needed. Dhinsa's entire empire, this whole thing built on fear and silence, was about to come crashing down under a mountain of evidence.
At this point, the case against him was absolutely airtight. I mean, just look at this mountain of evidence. They had the hitman's full confession, they had recordings of Dhinsa's jailhouse calls, in Punjabi, mind you, where he's still running his empire from behind bars. They recovered an actual physical hit list with plans to kill the remaining witnesses. They found the devices he used for the pump-rigging fraud, and maybe the cherry on top? Cell phone records that placed Dhinsa right near the scene of Satinderjeet's murder. It was over.
And then came the trial. And Surjeet, remember him? The witness who fled in total fear for his life? He came back. He returned to testify against the man who had terrorized his entire community. The jury saw all that evidence we just talked about, and it only took them 2.5 days to come back with the verdict: guilty. The Indian Godfather's reign of terror was officially, finally over.
So what was the sentence? 8 consecutive life sentences without any possibility of parole. Dhinsa was never, ever going to be a free man again.
And you know, this quote from the prosecutor really sums up why this case was so much bigger than just one guy. He said, they were able to help a community that, for good reason, doesn't normally turn to law enforcement. It wasn't just about locking Dhinsa up, it was about breaking that cycle of fear and proving to a community that had every reason to be skeptical that justice was actually possible.
Which really leads us to our final thought here. The legal case is closed. The empire is gone. But what about the scars? You have to think that the kind of fear Dhinsa built over so many years, that doesn't just disappear overnight with a guilty verdict. So it leaves you with this question, right? When the dust settles on something like this, after being terrorized from within, how does a community even begin to learn how to trust again?